Welcome to The Rest is Politics with me, Alistair Campbell.
And with me, Rory Stewart. Next year is going to be the biggest.
2 billion people are going to vote.
Extraordinary.
In general elections.
2/3 of all citizens in democratic countries will vote next year. And this is the biggest year on record since records began in the 1960s. There's never been a democratic fest like next year. Including
us, including America, including Europe, European elections.
So it's going to be astonishing. Yeah. And so that next year will be the big Rest is Politics democratic election year, but Argentina is this year. So Argentina had first election 22nd of October, runoff 19th of November, and there were two previous presidents who could have run. Alberto Fernandez, who was the guy that was in from 1919 till now, and Cristina de Kirchner, who we'll talk a little bit more about, who was in from 2007 to 2015. So they didn't run. Instead of which, the final two are absolutely extraordinary. So do you want to tell us a little bit about the two final candidates? Yeah.
It is the most incredible runoff. So you've had, their system is that you have the presidential election, you have to get, I think it's 45%. And if you don't, then it goes up to a runoff of the first two.
Which is similar to the French presidential system.
Similar, not identical, but similar. And they also have, interestingly, compulsory voting from 18 to 70. And you can vote at 16 and 17, but it's not compulsory, which is quite an interesting sort of, we should maybe think about that. So the two that have made it through, one of them is the economy minister who has presided over 140% inflation. So that is pretty amazing. That's Sergio Massa.
Just on that, on your basis of a normal political analysis, an economy minister who's presided over 140% inflation.
And 40% living in poverty.
Yeah, and has seen the dollar go from 80 pesos to dollar in April 2020 to 1,200 pesos to dollar today. So in just 3 years, unbelievable loss in the value of the currency. And nevertheless, did better in the first round of voting than his rival.
Than Javier Milei. So Javier Milei, so that's Sergio Massa, who's the leader of the Union of the Homeland, which you say is the
and he's connected
party.
to Peronist and Kirchner. He's from that tradition.
Although he's slightly distanced himself from that. And he's also in the past said that Cristina should go to jail. But he seems to be backing down from that now. And then Javier Milei is this guy who's constantly compared to Trump and Bolsonaro. He's a kind of economist, radical right. He picked a massive fight with the Pope during the campaign. He goes around with a chainsaw to sort of show that the whole system needs to be chopped down. So Massa ended up with over 36%, and Milei ended up on 30%, which is not much beyond what he got in the primaries, which is like a kind of dummy run. And the big loser was the conservative Bullrich, and she only got, I think, 24%.
But now her voters now are the key. So who are they going to go to?
Well, she's backing Milei. Whether all of her voters will is another matter.
So she's backing the Mr. Whig. The other thing to understand about Milei, which makes him really famous, is that he had a Mastiff dog, huge dog called Conan the Barbarian.
Yeah.
Obviously in testimony to our previous
interviewee
on
And by the way,
leading.
Javier, if you're listening, yes, we would have you on.
Very happy to have you on. And then he sent off some cells from Conan the Barbarian to Worcester, Massachusetts to have it cloned. So he ends up with 4 identical Mastiffs who are basically Conan the Barbarian reborn, who he's called after right-wing politicians, of which the one he refers to most is Milton Friedman. And frequently in his political speeches, he cites a conversation that he's had with Milton. So he will often say, I've been thinking hard overnight, but Milton advised me to...
Milton the dog.
Milton the dog.
So the dog advised him.
Yep, and he's quite happy to say this at the Senate and things. I've been talking to Milton, and Milton has said, really, this is where we should go. And his economic policies that he's pushing for include essentially getting rid of the Argentinian currency and replacing it with the dollar. Yeah. And you can understand, in a sense, why. I mean, if you've gone from 80 pesos to dollar to 1,200 pesos to dollar in just 3 years. But, of course, the problems with that are many. And one of them people will remember from Greece's experience through the financial crisis is that if you lose control of your currency, and pin yourself to another country's currency, which is what you do with the dollar, you lose a huge amount of flexibility in being able to drop your exchange rates to rebalance your exports. And Argentina went through this a little bit in the past. Tell us also about the main facts about Argentina we know, and the thing for which you are most famous in Argentina is, of course, your amazing appearance with Diego Maradona.
Oh, Rory, please, honestly, I'm going to have to talk about playing with Diego Maradona again. I mean, okay, we should probably do a whole special episode.
I'm really sorry he's not around for us to interview and talk about.
Apparently his final words were, I once played with Alistair Campbell.
And what he learnt from you. Yeah, that's right.
We should say to our listeners that the producers are now head in hands, sick to death of hearing it. I never tire of talking about Diego Maradona, but I won't do it now. So Perón, and he's one of we talk about isms, Thatcherism, Blairism, Sunakism, or whatever. But Peronism is one of the kind of defining political philosophies, certainly in terms of Argentina. So Juan Perón, who was part of the coup back in the day, and then president, then lost, then his party was banned.
So president, late 1940s, early 1950s, yep, and with a wife called Eva.
Here's a quiz question for you. How old was Eva Perón when she died?
Gosh, I have no idea. 70?
33.
No.
Isn't that amazing?
That is amazing.
Yeah. And she's probably now more famous than her husband, thanks to Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice.
Are you going to sing "Don't Cry for Me, Argentina"?
Don't cry for me, Argentina. No, but it isn't. It's so that. But he was like this incredibly charismatic leader. When you read his definition of his own political philosophy, it sounds very like New Labour. It's like economy, it's social programs, it's a bit of patriotism, but without being kind of overtly nationalistic. And what's been amazing about Peronism,
but it was incredible. I mean,
it became very, very
and we also
dictatorial.
Forget, exactly how brutal it was. And really, Perón invented or reinvented populism in a way that dominated Latin American politics. So he was all about the people against the elites.
Yeah. And
Argentina, just to take it back a little bit, I mean, Argentina was this astonishing success story in the late 19th century. Unlike Brazil, Mexico, it was a country which really was dominated by European immigration, predominantly Italian immigration, which rapidly overwhelmed the indigenous population, so that it felt the late 19th century more like maybe Canada or Australia in terms of relationship between immigrants, European immigrants, and the local population. Had this incredible economic boom, late 19th century, with the invention of refrigerated ships that allowed people to move Argentinian beef across the world. GDP per capita in Argentina was higher than in the United States by the end of the 19th century. It was one of the 7 largest economies in the world. It remained, by the time Perón took over, one of the 15 largest economies in the world. So this enormous giant, and really did feel as though this was an Australia or a Canada, or this kind of country. And of course, your friend Diego Maradona, as his name implies, part of that Italian immigration movement.
Since 1946, the Peronist candidate has won 10 out of 13 elections in those which they've been allowed to stand. There was a period when they couldn't stand; they were banned. And if Massa wins, and the one that we got to know quite well was Carlos Menem, who was also a Peronist, but he moved it to the right.
Yes,
Massa's moving it a little bit back to the centre left, but they fight under this umbrella of Peronism. And the thing that he's now emphasising in the runoff against Milei, he's going very heavy on family, religion, and la patria, the nation. And I think the reason for that is he's working out that is why Milei seems to have got stuck at 30%, is because he did, let's say he picked a fight with the Pope. The Pope ended up calling him a Nazi. And so he decided he's got to go out and really go for the Pope. But the Pope is probably, if you're going to list the countries where the Pope is very, very popular, Argentina is going to be very high up there.
Is he not an Argentinian Pope?
Well, that is the other reason. So I think that it'll be fascinating to see what happens now, because although Bullrich has sort of swung behind Milei, I don't think you can guarantee that all her voters will.
Now, again, for listeners who aren't Latin American specialists, we've talked exactly like us, like us. One of the ways to think about what's happening in Latin America is that many of the countries followed a pretty standard evolution. So Argentina, like many of the countries in Latin America, went from military rule in the late 70s, early 80s. So people in Britain will remember General Galtieri and the invasion of the Falkland Islands. Then went through huge debt crises in the 1980s. Mexico had this enormous debt crisis in 82, but it's true of Brazil, true of Argentina. And then in the 90s, they got these technocrats. So you were talking about Menem in Argentina, Cardoso in Brazil, Zedillo in Mexico. So in the 90s, they went much more sort of third way, neoliberal. And then in the early 2000s, they began to benefit from a massive commodity boom, which also brought in more left-wing populist governments who benefited from the commodity boom, spent money like water, but increasingly got themselves caught up in corruption scandals. So in Brazil, famously the car wash scandal, which ended up with Lula, who's now back again,
in jail.
Going to jail. I mean, he literally took a beachfront apartment from a businessman. But in Argentina, corruption is beyond everything. I mean, there's a famous cliche about British politics that, British politics is about class. All else is embellishment and detail. To some extent, you could say Argentinian politics recently has been about corruption and all else is embellishment and detail. I mean, the corruption scandals are just beyond imagining. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in some cases, billions of dollars of others. So Kirchner herself is caught up in incredible allegations about building enormous roads to nowhere in her own base, constituency base in remote areas, where the contractors' kickbacks, the delays. I mean, if you think HS2 is bad, I mean, this stuff is beyond imagining.
Presumably this is why she didn't run in the end, is that she feared what would be coming her way.
Well, she was found guilty and sentenced to 6 years in December 22, and she's now appealing. There's also this great notebook scandal that caught her up, where the driver, one of the government car service drivers, was keeping notebooks over a period of 7 years, just recording the cash coming in and out, the deals doing. And
recording it for his own benefit?
In the notebooks, yeah. And people are a bit suspicious about what on earth he thought he was doing, keeping these notebooks going for 10 years and then handing them over. But
if Suella Braverman's driver is listening.
It's absolutely extraordinary. It's so recorded, I think, $160 million in bribes. And Jose Lopez, 2016, who was one of the big figures.
So hold on, the driver's driving the car and Christina's in the back of the car doing these deals?
Not Christina always. It's often different sorts of ministers levels connected to her. But Jose Lopez, for example, was found stashing $9 million in cash and luxury watches in a convent. So he was the Minister of, I think, Development.
We thought God would be looking after it for him.
And a lot of the businesses have testified now in Argentina. I mean, Paulo Rocca, who's one of the most famous billionaires, just says, we just had to pay bribes. Kirchner's had $8.5 million of her own cash frozen. Her daughter's had $6.5 million of her daughter's cash frozen. And again, one asks where exactly this money comes from.
This is the other reason why it's pretty remarkable that Massa did as well as he did, because if you're the finance minister of the government that's presided over all this, then I have no evidence to say one way or the other about him, but it's hard to sort of think that doesn't get counted against you as well. And yet he's got 36.6% of the vote.
And part of the point is that in Argentina, and this is true in Brazil too, that the leftist populist politicians will suggest that these corruption charges are completely politically motivated. And it's definitely true in Argentina.
Well, that's the game Trump is playing now.
Absolutely. The judge, exactly like Trump. But particularly in Argentina, the judges tend not to act until there's been an election. And then they turn against the government. So there's a real problem with the judiciary, because the judges can decide when to take a case, when not to take a case, when to proceed. So anyway, really worth watching.
No, it's going to be fascinating. It'll be absolutely fascinating. And the other thing, whoever wins, I mean, we talk a lot about if Keir Starmer becomes Prime Minister, he's got a really difficult sort of, set of circumstances to inherit. But Argentina, you're talking about, they're very close to hyperinflation. They've been in triple-digit inflation now for quite some time. Milei, he basically says climate change is a hoax. He's on that game. And he got into this massive row with the Pope, who he ended up the Pope called him a Nazi, and he called the Pope a filthy leftist. And I think to call the Pope a filthy leftist in any majorly Catholic country in the world is, you've got to be very confident that your chainsaw massacre is going to be successful.
So I was talking to an Argentinian friend on Monday night for dinner who said the key thing to understand, he may have been unfair to his own countrymen, but he said the key thing to understand is that Sergio Massa is very, very good looking, and that really matters in Argentinian politics.
He's also very good looking, and he's very smart, and he's a survivor. And the thing about being good looking, I don't know if I've told you this before, there was once a study in an American university where they had 100 pairs of two sets of pictures. And the pictures were of two candidates in elections which had already happened. Okay, so the elections, and they were council elections, senatorial elections. They weren't kind of household figures. We're not talking sort of Trump-Biden. And they presented these pictures to a very large sample of people and said, who do you think won? Based on the pictures, and they got like 9 out of 10 right.
And it's largely they just picked the better looking one.
They picked the one that they thought looked more
I was
like
always
a winner.
very struck by this when I went with the Foreign Affairs Committee and Defence.
It's probably why you lost to Boris Johnson, really, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Because he's such a good-looking guy.
That's what it was, exactly. No, when I went with the Foreign Affairs Committee and Defence Committee to Washington, I was always very, very struck by the fact that we were all really small and weird looking. So me and my friend Frank Roy would go into the thing, and every American senator we met was well over 6 foot, perfect. Yeah, looked amazing and it was really. In fact, actually, I thought the security guards in the Capitol found it very difficult to believe that we were members of Parliament. Well, I think we should keep a very close run on this. So runoff 19th November, and I'm afraid whoever takes over, you would not really want to be running the Argentine economy at the moment. And it is a tragedy because, as we said, the late 19th century, this was one of the greatest economies in the world. And sadly, since the 1940s, it has really, really struggled to regain its feet.
All right, Roy. See you next time at Question Time.
See you next time for Question Time.